The hot, merciless afternoon of 1885 stifled the town of Ridgewood, Kansas. The sun beat down so fiercely that even the dust on the main street seemed superheated. The air was heavy, saturated with the smell of sweat, horse manure, and the repulsive anticipation that hung over every auction. On a makeshift platform, cobbled together from rough planks, stood Amelia Stern, a young girl of about 17, whose bright, almost white hair cascaded over her shoulders like molten gold, sharply contrasting with her pale face, down which streamed trails of tears, mixing with the dust. Her eyes, once clear and full of youthful innocence, were now wide with terror. She wore a simple, faded dress that barely concealed the thinness of her fragile figure, and around her delicate wrists, rough ropes were tightly bound, tying her to a shabby post. Just a month prior, Amelia had lived a completely different life. Her parents, hardworking farmers from central Kansas, had lost everything due to a plague that ravaged their livestock. Despair and illness broke them, and they died one after another, leaving Amelia an orphan, without relatives, without money, without hope. She tried to hold on to the family farm, but debts grew like a snowball. The local moneylender, Archibald Claw Crawford, a man with cunning, perpetually squinting eyes and long, thin fingers that seemed designed to grasp at others' possessions, swiftly announced confiscation. He was known for his ruthlessness and for always squeezing the last drop from his victims. And now, Amelia, the only remnant of the Stern family, was put up for auction. Not the land, not the cattle, but she herself. As the final payment for debts, the auctioneer, a corpulent man with a crimson face and a loud, smoke-rasped voice, boomed, "Lot number 13. Young Amelia Stern, a sturdy girl, capable of work. Bidding starts at $10. The crowd gathered at the platform consisted of sweaty, coarse men. Their gazes swept over Amelia, evaluating her like a prize horse or a strong slave. Each look was like a spit in her soul. She shrank from the humiliation, her heart pounding in her chest, threatening to burst. She heard whispers, "Too young, too thin, good for kitchen work." These words made her wish she could disappear into the ground. She was not a person, but an item. Among the crowd stood Callum O'Connell, a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy in his mid-30s. His face was weathered by sun and wine, and an old scar for a run-in with a wild bull marked his cheek. Callum's eyes, deep and thoughtful, usually expressed calm, but now they burned with the fire of suppressed anger. He was the owner of a small but successful ranch, Lonely Gulch, on the outskirts of Ridgewood. Callum was known for his honesty and for always keeping his word, but his taciturn nature often created an aura of detachment around him. He had been an orphan since early childhood and knew well what loneliness and injustice felt like. His parents had died during an Indian raid, and he himself was almost sold for pennies, but an old, kind pastor saved and raised him. Callum remembered this to this day. He had come to town for supplies, but, hearing about the auction, decided to watch. Seeing Amelia, his heart clenched with pain and fury. In her eyes, he recognized the same desperate fear he had once seen in his own. This scene awakened in him the deep injustice he had once experienced himself. He clenched his fists, feeling anger rise within him. $15. Someone in the crowd shouted. 20. Another voice rang out. 25. A third added. The auctioneer rubbed his hands with a triumphant look. 25. Anyone higher? Callum stepped forward. His voice, low and husky, sounded unexpectedly loud in the stifling silence. Callum firmly $50. The crowd fell silent, and heads turned to Callum. $50 for a young, thin girl was an unheard of price. Auctioneer, his crimson face stretched in surprise. 50. Anyone? Callum looked directly at Amelia. His gaze was serious, but there was no contempt or lust in it, only deep understanding. Amelia looked up at him, and in her gaze, besides tears and fear, a faint ray of hope flickered. Archibald Crawford shrilly, is unfair. The girl should be sold at market price. He only wants cheap labor." Callum turned to Crawford, his eyes flashing with dangerous fire. He knew Crawford was the instigator of this auction, the man who had squeezed every last drop from the Stern family. Callum calmly, but with a threat, "Her price is what I named, and I am not paying it for a slave. I am paying for her to be free, and I will not tolerate anyone interfering in my affairs." Crawford paled. He knew Callum's reputation. This cowboy was not one to make idle threats. The auctioneer, sensing the tension, hastened to conclude the bidding. $50. Going once. $50. Going twice. $50. Going 3 times. Sold. To Callum O'Connell. The crowd buzzed, but no one dared to object. Callum approached the platform, pulled a tightly packed pouch of gold from his pocket, and tossed it to the auctioneer. Then he drew his knife and with a single movement severed the ropes binding Amelia. The girl, freed from her shackles, fell into his arms. She trembled like a leaf in the wind. Callum picked her up, light as a feather, and carried her away from the auction block, away from the crowd, away from this nightmare. He held her gently, feeling her fragile body shaking with sobs. He felt anger, but it was mixed with deep compassion. He knew she had a long road to healing ahead, but he was ready to walk it with her. Hope, thin as a spider's web, flickered in his heart. He had saved her, and this was only the beginning. He would be her protector, her support. He would give her a chance at a new life. When Callum O'Connell carried Amelia Stern out of the stifling crowd of Ridgewood, the scorching air behind the auction block felt icy to her. Her fragile body shook with uncontrollable sobs, and her head pressed helplessly against his broad chest, soaking his sweaty shirt with salty tears. She saw nothing but blurred shapes, heard nothing but the pounding of her own heart, drowning out the last shouts of the crowd that, moments before, had seemed to desire her enslavement. In Callum's strong arms, she felt not so much salvation as complete exhaustion. Her last ounce of strength had drained away, leaving only the bitter realization of humiliation and a deep, throbbing pain in her chest. He seated her on his black horse, Montana, whose flanks still gleamed from his hard ride, and, holding her gently, swung into the saddle behind her. The ride to Lonely Gulch Ranch took several hours. The sun gradually dipped westward, painting the endless Kansas plains in golden and crimson hues. Callum rode slowly, avoiding sudden movements. His silence was thick, enveloping, yet not oppressive. Amelia, gradually calming down, felt the warmth of his body through the thin fabric of her dress. She dared not look up, ashamed of her appearance, her tears, all the horror she had endured. She was like a trapped animal, awaiting another blow. Callum, feeling her tremble, merely held her tighter with one arm, guiding the reins with the other. He knew words were useless now. Only time and peace could somewhat heal the wounds he saw in her frightened eyes. He remembered his own pain, remembered how hard it was to trust after the world had shown him its cruelest side. His goal was not just to save her from chains, but to give her true freedom from fear and despair. Finally, as the sky grayed, the outlines of the ranch appeared on the horizon. It was a modest but well-kept place, a small log house, several barns, a well with a tall oast. The ranch was nestled in a small, cozy hollow, surrounded by hills. A thin plume of smoke curled from the chimney, and a warm, inviting light glowed in the windows. As they approached the house, an elderly man with kind wrinkles around his eyes and a gray beard almost completely covering his chin emerged. This was old Pastor Morgan, who had raised Callum. His gaze was soft and understanding. Morgan quietly, with deep wisdom, "Callum, I had a feeling you wouldn't return alone. What happened?" Callum briefly recounted what had happened at the auction. Pastor Morgan simply shook his head, his eyes filling with sorrow. He approached Amelia, who was still sitting on the horse, unable to move, and gently stroked her hair. Morgan tenderly welcomed, "Home, child. You are safe." These words, spoken with such genuine kindness, pierced Amelia to the core. Home. She hadn't heard that word since her mother died. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but this time they were different, mixed with relief. Callum helped her dismount and practically carried her to the door. Inside, the house was simple, but incredibly cozy. A crackling fire in the fireplace, wooden walls adorned with old photographs, and the smell of freshly baked bread. Pastor Morgan pointed to a small, neat room. Morgan with a smile, "Here, this is your room. A warm bed, clean clothes, and on the table, you'll find food. Rest, child." Amelia entered the room. It was small, but clean and bright. A thick woolen blanket lay on the bed, and next to it stood a carved wooden table. From the window, the endless prairie landscape, bathed in the soft moonlight, was visible. She collapsed onto the bed, feeling all her muscles relax. Pastor Morgan brought her a plate of hot stew and a mug of herbal tea. The food was simple but nourishing, and Amelia, despite her lack of appetite, managed to eat a few spoonfuls. Callum standing in the doorway, his voice quiet, "You need to eat, Amelia, to regain your strength." She nodded, not looking up. Words caught in her throat, and her mind was in chaos. She felt dirty, broken, unworthy of this kindness. Fear of the future, of the unknown, of Callum, who seemed too good to be true, choked her. She couldn't understand why he had done it, why he had spent so much money on her, and what he now expected from her. In her world, everything had a price, and the price was usually cruel. The next morning, Amelia woke to the smell of coffee and freshly baked biscuits. Her body ached, and her ankles, chafed by the ropes, hurt. But for the first time in a long while, she felt safe. She left her room and saw Callum sitting at the table, reading a newspaper, and Pastor Morgan bustling by the stove. Morgan smiling. "Good morning, child. Did you sleep well? Sit down. Eat." Callum looked up, and in his gaze, Amelia saw no judgment, no demands, only a calm, expectant kindness. Callum simply, "You don't have to do anything today, Amelia. Just get used to it. Rest." These words brought a new wave of pain to Amelia. She was used to working to exhaustion, used to being constantly busy so as not to think about her misfortune. Idleness seemed more terrifying than any labor. She felt useless, a burden, incapable of anything but being someone's commodity. Shame burned her cheeks. She knew she had to do something to justify her presence here, but she didn't know what. How could she repay this man who had saved her, asking for nothing in return? She spent the day in quiet despair, trying to find something to occupy herself. She tidied her room, though it was already clean, reread the Bible, and looked at the dried cherry blossom, which now seemed a symbol not only of the past but also of irrevocably lost innocence. By evening, such a profound sadness overwhelmed her that she just wanted to lie down and never wake up. She felt utterly lost, her heart aching with the realization of her worthlessness. She was not just a homeless orphan, she was a brand, a reminder that people could be cruel and unjust. She feared that sooner or later Callum would realize she wasn't worth the money he had spent on her and would cast her out. And that thought was more terrifying than anything. She was once again on the brink of despair, and no kindness could stifle this inner cry of pain. The days at Lonely Gulch Ranch passed slowly, blurring into a hazy, languid anticipation for Amelia. Every morning, she woke with a throbbing pain in her ankles, where the ropes had so recently constricted, and a deep anxiety in her heart. Despite the clean bed, the warmth of the fireplace, and the abundant food, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was all temporary, that sooner or later she would have to pay. Callum's silence, though not hostile, oppressed her, intensifying her sense of worthlessness. She watched him work from early morning until late night on the ranch, mending fences, breaking horses, herding cattle. His figure, strong and confident, was always in motion, and his gaze was fixed somewhere in the distance, as if he saw something that was inaccessible to her. He was the embodiment of strength and independence, and she was his complete opposite, fragile, frightened, devoid of willpower. Pastor Morgan, on the other hand, was her only solace. His kind, wrinkled hands, accustomed to comforting, often rested on her shoulder, and his voice, imbued with wisdom and patience, was her sole source of peace. He told her stories from the Bible, parables of forgiveness and hope, but these words seemed hollow to her. How could one forgive a world that had treated her so cruelly? How could one hope for anything when all dreams had been shattered? Morgan softly, his eyes looking into her very soul. "My child, sometimes the strongest chains are those we forge within ourselves. Fear, shame, they can hold tighter than any ropes." Amelia simply nodded, unable to reply. She understood his words, but her pain was too deep. She felt dirty, broken. Her youth had been stolen, her innocence trampled. The only thing she knew how to do was work, but even that now seemed useless to her. She tried to find something to occupy herself, anything to stifle her sorrow. She tidied the house, though it was always perfectly clean. She attempted to cook, but her food was bland and unappetizing. Callum and Silas ate her meals in silence, without a single word of reproach, but Amelia saw their gazes, full of understanding, and that only made her feel worse. She felt like a burden, tolerated only out of pity. Shame and despair gnawed at her from within. One day, as Amelia tried to repair an old saddle in the barn, her clumsy fingers got tangled in the straps once more. Tears welled up in her eyes. At that moment, Callum entered the barn. He watched her for a while, then approached and silently took the saddle from her hands. His strong, calloused fingers deftly untangled the straps, then he took out his tools and began to mend it. His movements were precise, confident, and Amelia felt even more useless in comparison. Callum, without looking up, his voice even, "You don't have to work here, Amelia. I told you, you are free." These words, spoken so simply, without any hidden agenda, shook her. Free, but from what? From work. From life. She didn't know what to do with her freedom. She was free from chains, but not from herself, not from her past, not from her shame. Amelia, her voice was hoarse, full of pain, but I have to do something. I can't just be a burden. Callum looked up at her. In his eyes, there was a deep, hidden sadness that she couldn't comprehend. Callum softly, a burden. You know, Amelia, sometimes the greatest help we can give someone is simply to be there. Just to give a person time. Time to heal wounds. Time to learn to breathe again. His words were a revelation to her. He wasn't demanding work from her. He wasn't expecting payment. He was simply giving her time. Time to be herself, to deal with her pain. For the first time in a long while, she felt not burning shame, but a tender, almost painful touch of hope. Maybe she wasn't as broken as she thought. Maybe she still had a chance. Weeks passed. Amelia still tried to stay in the shadows, but her dark eyes were no longer so frightened. She began to help Pastor Morgan with the garden he had cultivated near the house. His soil, despite the drought, was fertile, and Amelia was surprised to find that her fingers, accustomed to soap and water, now enjoyed digging in the earth. She planted seeds, weeded beds, watered plants. Every sprout, every new shoot was a small miracle to her. In caring for the plants, she found solace. One day, as she was picking tomatoes, Callum approached her. In his hands, he held an old, worn album. He squatted beside her, his gaze soft, almost tender. Callum quietly, you know, Amelia, I remember my mother loved to grow flowers. She always said, a flower is the soul of the earth. He opened the album. On the yellowed pages were photographs. Callum was just a boy. His parents, beautiful, strong people, smiled from the darkened pictures. Next to them were photos of the ranch, as it was many years ago. Young, lush greenery, plenty of cattle, happy faces. Amelia felt her heart ache. She saw how much Callum had lost, but his eyes were not full of bitterness. They held only a quiet, deep sadness and a kind of calm acceptance. He knew what loss was, but he hadn't allowed it to break him. He had kept his ranch, his dignity, his kindness. Callum continuing, his gaze fixed somewhere in the distance. I remember the day they died. I was only 10. I thought the world had collapsed. I thought I was alone. But then Pastor Morgan appeared. He taught me that life is not only what you lose, but also what you find. These words pierced Amelia. She had always thought about her losses, about what had been taken from her. But what had she found? She had found Callum. She had found Pastor Morgan. She had found this garden where she felt useful. She had found herself. Not the one who was broken and humiliated, but the one who could still grow, like these plants she so carefully nurtured. In her heart, through layers of pain and despair, a thin but stubborn sprout of hope pushed through. Hope that her life was not over, that she still had a chance to find meaning. Callum hadn't just saved her from chains, he had given her something far greater, a chance at rebirth. He had given her not only a home but also the opportunity to feel alive again. The bouquet of wildflowers in Amelia's hands was not just a gift, but a symbol of her rebirth. In the dim light of the kerosene lamp on the porch of Lonely Gulch Ranch, she felt herself shedding her old, weary skin. The words, spoken with such determination, were not just a wish but a vow to herself. Callum, watching her, saw in her eyes not only a glimmer of hope, but also a spark of that inner strength that he knew had always resided within her. Pastor Morgan simply nodded, his wise eyes looking approvingly at the girl. The next morning, Amelia woke before everyone else. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and fried bacon already hung in the air when she stepped out onto the porch. Callum and Silas, preparing for another day of work, were drinking coffee. Amelia firmly, I'm ready to learn. Where do we start? Callum raised an eyebrow in surprise, but a glint of approval shone in his eyes. Silas, with a chuckle, pointed to a bucket of milk. Silas hoarsely, we'll start with the cows, girl. They don't like to wait. Thus began Amelia's new days on the ranch. Each dawn brought new lessons and new challenges. Callum, though taciturn, proved to be a patient teacher. He showed her how to properly saddle a horse, how to use a lasso, how to distinguish a sick sheep from a healthy one. Her delicate fingers, once accustomed to fabric and needle, were now calloused from ropes and hard labor. She learned with perseverance, absorbing every word, every gesture. Jake, the young cowboy who had initially scoffed at her clumsiness, now watched her progress with respect. Soon, Amelia became an indispensable part of the ranch. She not only managed the household but also helped with work in the cow yard, and understood the calculations Callum made each month. Her mind, sharp and inquisitive, quickly grasped the essence of things, and soon she could solve problems that even Silas found perplexing. Callum increasingly found himself looking at her not as a fragile girl, but as an equal, as a person whose strength and intellect were worthy of admiration. His lonely heart, closed off from the world for many years, slowly began to thaw. He saw her blossom, her eyes fill with life again, and her laughter become freer and more sincere. He saw in her not just a rescued victim, but a woman who had found her place in this harsh world. One day, when Callum and Silas had gone to a distant pasture, leaving Amelia and Jake to look after the ranch, trouble struck. An epidemic of cattle plague broke out in the town of Ridgewood. The news was brought by a frantic neighboring Cowboy, his face contorted with fear. Cowboy gasping, "Callum, the plague, the cattle are dying, and Crawford, he's buying up land for next to nothing." Amelia felt her heart clench. Archibald Crawford, the man's name was etched into her memory like a brand. Now he was trying to destroy not only her life but the lives of everyone around them. Anger, cold and burning, rose in her chest. She couldn't let him do it. Jake, young and inexperienced, was in a panic. Jake frightened, "What are we going to do?" Amelia, "Callum's gone. The cattle will get sick." Amelia looked at Jake. She saw his fear, but there was no trace of hesitation in her eyes. She remembered Pastor Morgan's words about dinner chains and Callum's words that life is not only what you lose, but also what you find. She was no longer a helpless girl. She was part of this ranch, part of this land. Amelia firmly, her voice unexpectedly strong, "We will fight. The plague is spread through water. We must cut off our cattle from infected watering holes, and we will not give Crawford a single chance." Jake looked at her in surprise, and then a spark of hope appeared in his eyes. Amelia quickly gathered all the ranch hands. She explained the plan to them: barricade all streams leading to the pastures, create new watering points for the cattle, meticulously disinfect the corrals. It was a colossal task, but the men, seeing her determination, began to act. She directed them, gave orders, worked alongside everyone. Her hands covered in calluses, her face in dust and dirt. The pain from muscle strain was burning, but it only spurred her on. She felt alive, more than ever before. This was her fight, and she was not going to back down. When Callum and Silas returned 2 days later, they saw a completely different picture. The watering holes were blocked, new wells dug, and the cattle, though exhausted, remained healthy. Lonely Gulch Ranch was the only one in the area to have escaped the plague. Amelia, tired but proud, met them at the gate. Callum, his voice was hoarse with surprise and admiration. "Amelia, what? How did you do it?" Amelia simply, "I did what I had to do. We couldn't just wait." Callum looked at her. He saw not just the girl he had saved, but the woman who had saved his ranch, his dream, his life. At that moment, he realized that his feelings for her had extended far beyond gratitude. It was love, deep, strong, capable of overcoming any adversity. Several months later, when the epidemic receded and Ridgewood began to recover, Archibald Crawford announced a new auction, this time selling the lands of ruined farmers. He thought he would acquire everything for a pittance, but he was mistaken. Callum, supported by Amelia, who took charge of all the calculations and organization, stood against him. This time, Callum was not alone. Dozens of farmers whose lands Crawford had tried to seize gathered at the auction block. They were ready to fight. Inspired by Amelia's example, Callum, his voice, loud and confident, echoed across the square. "Archibald Crawford, do you think you can take other people's land? Do you think people will remain silent? No, we will not let you do this." Crawford, standing on the platform, paled. He saw the eyes of the people, full of anger and determination. He saw Amelia, standing beside Callum, her face calm and strong. He realized he had lost. The farmers, united, drove down the prices and prevented Crawford from buying up the land. That same evening, Callum and Amelia sat on the ranch porch. The sunset painted the sky in golden hues. Callum, his voice was tender. "Amelia, I don't know what I would do without you. You saved me, saved the ranch." Amelia, her hand rested on his. "We saved it together, and I wouldn't be who I am if it weren't for you, Callum. You gave me a chance." Callum took her hand and kissed it. In his eyes, there was not only adoration but also a deep, tender love. He had found not just a woman, but his family, his meaning in life. Amelia, who was once broken and humiliated, now stood beside him, strong, confident, full of life. She had found not only freedom, but also love that healed all her wounds. Conclusion. The story of Amelia and Callum is not just a tale of overcoming injustice, but a profound reminder that even in the darkest of times, a person is capable of finding the strength for rebirth. In a modern world where economic crises and social pressures can strip people of everything, it is important to remember that true value lies not in material possessions, but in inner resilience, compassion, and the ability to unite for the common good. This story teaches us to be vigilant against injustice, to believe in the power of the human spirit, and to remember that even a single act of kindness can change someone's life forever, transforming tears of despair into the joy of triumph.